August 19th, 2025. Well, lots happening now. I guess, first of all, I'll start off with before we get the main topic here. I hear that the Texas Democrats are back in the legislature now, and they're going to have a second special session, and they can get on with the redistricting bill. So well, I thought that's it. I guess they were just trying to make a point that they disagreed with the whole thing, and they've come back now, and I guess we're going to get it done, and that's good. And then, of course, the big thing is let's put it this way, President Trump's ongoing quest for the Nobel Peace Prize, or his effort to end the Ukraine war, however you want to characterize that. Uh, Following the meeting in Alaska on uh, Friday uh, with with Putin of Russia, now he's now had invited Zelensky, and Zelensky decided he'd bring his friends along for a little backup, and they had a nice little meeting, and he even dressed a little better than last time, at least good enough to kind of pass Trump's approval. Perhaps not quite as good as he was dressing before the war broke out, but at any rate, and they all got together and are discussing the idea of how to go forward with the peace plan. And I guess that we now know what the one big thing that Trump said after the meeting, on the Handy interview, what was the one big stumbling block that he wasn't sure about. And I guess I'm pretty sure that may well be the nature of the security guarantees. I think that probably is a big showstopper, particularly on the Russian side. And I hear they've already stated that what's being discussed is not acceptable to them, and that is the idea that essentially they would get sort of some kind of guarantee from NATO countries, sort of like Article 5, except they wouldn't actually be formally members of NATO. Now, what that entails, I don't know, but it sounds like it would involve deployment of U.S. and other NATO troops on Ukrainian soil to be sort of a peacekeeper or watching the deal or something like that. So, and that's kind of what's being discussed. The other potential showstopper is, will Ukraine actually agree to cede any territory, legally, that is, and particularly, will they be willing to cede anything that Russia's not formally conquered yet? And that, or will, that's the kind of issues where we've kind of gotten to on this right now, and that we're kind of seeing the other side of the story, so to speak. I get the feeling, though, that Zelensky was on his best behavior given what happened the last time he was in the White House, and decided not to cause a ruckus on the premises of the White House. That doesn't mean when he gets back to Ukraine he's all going to be sweetness and light about this subject, but the thing now seems to be a push to try to get Putin and Zelensky together with Trump in a meeting somewhere. We're not sure where that would occur, and to try to hammer out some kind of a deal. That's going to be interesting, because up to now, I mean, we're not sure. I mean, Trump was overheard saying something to the effect that perhaps he wants us to get this meeting together, i.e., that Putin does, was what was inferred, although it wasn't specifically stated who. And we already know that Zelensky wanted to have this meeting with Putin, I guess. Although why, I don't know, to get in an argument. I mean that could be a lot less polite, I think, than the one between either of the two of them with Trump, of course. So, but getting down to of course, as this is being discussed, these peace discussions are going on. The war continues to rage at the same time, and the Russians have been making some interesting advances in the last week or two. They've developed some kind of a thermal blanket thing to shield their troops from the infrared sensors on the drones, to try to infiltrate. And if it's used correctly and carefully, it can work. Although it sometimes can be a giveaway, because if you stay in the thing too long and heat up the shielding material, then it'll still show up. But in the meantime, they did manage to infiltrate fairly deep behind Ukrainian lines and caused a bunch of trouble. Although the Ukrainians have come back with a counterattack, apparently using some kind of militarized drone. So now, did I say drone? I meant to say robots. A militarized robot. Sorry, and that is a very interesting development. If you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, because then you can, and then you can also, and actually you have to kind of subscribe to I think for a like to register, or not necessarily that, but you have to actually have an account, I should say, on YouTube, and you can also follow me on Rumble. So at any rate, so that's kind of the situation at the moment, and I don't really like the idea of the NATO troops being the peacekeepers or the security guarantee, because to me this is potentially a recipe for actually getting us in an actual shooting war with Russia, which is something I think we should really avoid, because that's where the escalation probabilities go up significantly, and the problem I see with all this is that there are factions on both sides, but particularly the Ukrainians have some very militant factions, and the Azov units and so forth. After all, the current people that are running Ukraine are the people that overthrew the elected government. Whether it was a fair election or not, they did overthrow a government. And I'm thinking that they aren't going to sit happily by, and they're probably going to engage in some sabotage and reconnaissance activities, as they say nowadays over there, against the Russians if this deal is put in place. I don't think they're going to sit there passively. They're going to keep causing trouble. And when they do, Russia will retaliate. And excuse me, if NATO troops are there, and if they're to guarantee who did what, we know which side they're going to blame. They're going to blame the Russians, of course. And that seems to me to be a trigger for a conflict, not a movement toward peace. I mean, if you think just a little bit ahead and be just a touch cynical, that clearly is the case. I mean, and regardless of what you think about either side, you know that's the behavior you're going to likely see. So at any rate, that's the way I look at that one. I would prefer, if you're going to have peacekeepers, they be from neutral countries, definitely not. And my suggestion has long been, why not Egypt and India? Figuring that, well, yes, Egypt is kind of in the American sphere of influence, considering we give them a few $1 billion a year of aid, you know. And on the other hand, India is a little bit in the sphere of the Russian, a little bit because they have a lot of trading relationships with Russia, buying their oil. But I mean, neither one of them are principal combatants. Neither one of them really have a stake in Ukraine. And so I think they would be much better as neutral arbiters, and they both have large militaries. So they have a pool of troops they could, you know, draw from to create these peacekeeping units. And actually, in a lot of ways, there's the other aspect I think that's still left is exactly what level of military establishment will this post-war situation give the Ukrainians. If they're not formally members of NATO, but there's going to be NATO troops on the soil, what kind of weapons will they have? I mean, one of the biggest Russian concerns that led to this whole conflict fell into different categories, but one main category was the whole idea of them becoming allied with NATO countries, and potentially NATO weapons being brought into there, particularly missiles of various types, you know, or tactical aircraft, whatever. I mean, you know, and on the other hand, you have the whole let's say ethnic dispute with all kinds of anti-Russian, you know, laws being passed against the Russian Orthodox Church, us using the Russian language and having it be taught and so forth in the schools, all those issues. And none of this has really come to the foreground yet. I mean, you know, we're still looking at this like this is an attempt by Russia to have a land grab. And that's really a false interpretation. Land was part of it because the people live on land, and the people the Russians wanted to bring into their sphere, if nothing else for protection, if you will, from the Kiev government, where the land goes with the people. But it's really more about the people, I think, than property as such. To some degree, I agree there's minerals there, and that's another factor. but I don't think they'd have started a war of this magnitude over the minerals. Um, they have plenty of minerals themselves, and so I don't think that's the real motivation. I think the other issues are that. So we're looking at where does this end up? And again, I think that to a great extent, we, we don't know so much about how this even started. We do know now, based on what Secretary of State Rubio has said, that in fact there were a lot of pre-negotiations prior to this thing kicking into gear just very recently, in the last couple of weeks, that apparently there's been a lot of lead up to it. So, and remember, we can kind of see that Trump is basically doing the situation where you kind of tilt a little bit like you're this way, and you tilt a little bit like you're that way to try to bring the people together. And where he is somewhere, well, we don't know exactly where he is, but we've kind of gone from ceasefire as a must to the Russian position, let's have a deal and close the issue, which definitely what the Russians want. But on the other hand, you have to look at it that maybe what Trump wants too, because that might be what would lead to a Nobel Prize, right? I mean, just a ceasefire and an ongoing conflict might not be enough. So, and so that's, I think, the kind of thing that I see as being, in the play. Also, to a great extent, we don't know how. I still think that this could be, from the Russian point of view, a gambit. That it's definitely slowed up, delayed, if nothing else, the secondary sanctions being imposed, and so it gives him time to pursue his attempt to go ahead and capture the areas he wants to capture. And the main objection, one of the main objections that, well, not the only objection, one objection the Ukrainians would have to letting the Russians have the rest of Donbass is that is their forward defense line. That's where their fortifications are. If they pull out of there, there's very little between them, and so being the fearful approach, they'd say, well, they're going to use that and go ahead and restart the conflict, which again, I doubt that's really the case necessarily if they actually make a deal. I mean, I don't even see this stuff that Russia was a violator of the Minsk agreements. I don't think so. I think it was quite the other way around, wasn't it? That Ukraine refused to implement them. And besides that, they were attacking the separatist regions throughout the interim period anyhow. So, and I don't think there were any attacks on Kyiv during the period until the war broke out in February of 2022. So, when there were attacks in those separatist regions by the Ukrainian forces. So, so that's kind of the way that is. So at any rate, if it's just a gambit, then the idea is to play for time in order to continue to complete the military movements. And then what I think the idea, but I do think at the end of that time, there's a point at which the Russians do want to end the war. Because I don't believe they want to end up, continuing this forever. But I think they have certain objectives they're still trying to accomplish, and they could accomplish it diplomatically or they could accomplish it by military force. And so the question is Ukraine willing to let them have it without paying the price in lives, or are they going to insist on it being fought out to the end and then have it taken and then have a deal at that point? I mean, that's kind of the situation I think that's in play. So anyway, that's where I am by now, and I'm not as optimistic as the press is today, and I'm not as pessimistic as maybe they were last Friday. So anyway, so that's kind of that for now. I just thought I'd kind of give you an update on where my mind is on the subject, and but you never know. I think one of the key cards in the whole thing is the China card. Where does China go on this? And the general assumption, it seems like a lot of the people in the West have, is that China will support going against Russia just because of the economic trade issue. But if they do that, in my opinion, is they'll show that they're relatively weak. And if they're weak, that means that their ability to actually have influence is going to be reduced a lot, I think. But we'll live and learn on that one, hopefully. So I'll wrap this up for now and post this on YouTube and on Rumble, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.